Hi, everyone. Thank you for joining us today for Constangy's webinar, AI on the Job, How to Stay Ahead of Employment and Data Privacy Risk. A couple of housekeeping items before we get started. If you have questions throughout the presentation, please submit them through the chat function. You can access the chat through the toolbar located at the bottom of your screen. Our presenters may not be able to address all of your questions during this session, but they will follow up with you offline after the webinar. This program is approved for Sherman HRCI credits. We will be sharing those codes at the end of this presentation, so please stick around in order to get them. Lastly, we will be providing a copy of the PowerPoint used during today's webinar and a recording of the presentation. These materials will be sent to you once the recording has been uploaded by tomorrow morning. I'm now going to turn it over to today's presenters and co-chairs of our AI practice group, Christine Hogan, Ashley Orler, and Ryan Steidl.
All right. Thank you very much. We're excited to have everyone here today joining us for this exciting conversation. The three of us are co-chairs of our AI practice, and we each represent different specialties and practices within Constangy. So myself, I am part of our cyber team. I lead our compliance advisory services, proactive services within Constangy Cyber, and I'll turn it over to Christine to introduce herself.
Hi, everybody. My name is Christine Hogan. I am Constangy's first AI bot. Just kidding. I'm a partner in the New York office. I specialize in wage and hour and class and collective actions. And I'm very happy to be here also as a co-chair of the AI practice group.
Hi, everyone. My name's Ashley Orler. I am a partner in our Chicago office. I'm licensed in Michigan and Illinois, and I focus on helping employers with answering any type of employment questions that come up. I do a lot of advice and counsel work, and also I handle quite a bit of single plaintiff litigation involving discrimination claims and disputes regarding contracts. Go ahead and move to the agenda for today. Very briefly, what we're going to cover today is a very short overview of what is AI, just to make sure everyone's kind of on the same page, to go into more discussion on some of the common uses we're seeing in the context of HR, employment, and in-house legal teams for our clients. We're going to go through some of the risks of using AI for employers. And then Ryan's going to talk about the regulatory landscape, where we're at currently with AI regulations. Christine's going to then talk about implementing AI in practice. What are some of our thoughts on best scenarios for employers to keep in mind? And then Ryan's going to wrap it up by going into future trends and what we anticipate seeing in the near future, as this is a very rapidly evolving landscape. With that said, I'm going to turn it over to Christine.
All right. So I just want to point out really quickly that a lot of the pictures that you see here in our slide deck are generated by AI via Canvas and other kinds of AI tools. So that was just sort of a fun thing that we did as part of this preparation for this presentation. So next slide, what is AI? So there's a lot of different definitions that you find. There's some in the actual legislation, but for all intents and purposes, AI is just simply the ability of machines to perform tasks that are usually requiring human intelligence. So when we're talking about AI, next slide, there's been a sort of a process or a development of AI through time. At first, there was simple supervised learning where you would train an algorithm on a specific task, and that algorithm would turn something from A into B. So when we're talking about something like real-time deposition reporting, it's taking audio, it's turning it into text right in the moment. So that's an example of simple supervised learning. And then we get into deep learning, which is what a lot of the AI tools that we're going to talk about today are doing. There's an actual neural network. It's almost sort of similar to the human brain. And that neural network is going to allow the AI tool to take vast amount of information and putting it through multiple layers of processing and learning and training, and it's going to come out on the other end. So another example of that is ChatGPT. All right, so We want to talk about a couple of common AI and deep learning terms that you might hear today or in your own learning about AI. So generative AI, this is again ChatGPT. It's any type of AI that creates new content. Hallucinations, this is content that is fabricated by AI. So a lot of us have heard about cases where attorneys have submitted case law that don't exist. I think Ashley will be covering that in her section. That's what a hallucination is. A large language model, again, ChatGPT is a great example. It's systems that are trained on massive amounts of data that understand and then generate human language in response. Large language machine learning bias, the existence of output biases that mirror training data biases. So when we're talking about recruitment tools, we're talking about the risk that the recruitment tool, for example, will take bias that exists from the trainers and then push that through into the tool. And then you get the laws that Ryan is going to be covering later on in today's training. Then robotics and automation. This is where AI is leveraged to perform physical tasks. So anything in factories, replacing human workers with AI and automated machines. And finally, which Ashley will talk about in just a second, use cases. This is simply just a term we use to talk about the application of AI to address an issue. So next slide. What are companies using AI for? Now, this is a study from 2025. It gives you an overview in this particular survey of what this survey found in terms of what was most common. So a lot of the top reasons for using AI are currently still IT based. So we have predictive IT maintenance, et cetera. If you get down a little bit further, you're getting into more specialized AI uses, such as knowledge-based management and intelligent escalation, et cetera. And then in a LexisNexis study in 2023, which is a little bit more focused on our area of expertise, we have reasons for using AI, and they include increasing efficiency, researching, drafting documents, streamlining work, and analyzing documents. And in this particular study, they broke it down between lawyers and law students. And frankly, I'm surprised that the law students aren't using more AI than we all are, because I think they're a little on top of this this game. But in any event, we want to encourage everyone to talk to each other, and we want everyone to sort of have the benefit of each other's experiences and guidance. So we encourage everyone to use the chat, not just for later and for questions for us, but to talk about amongst yourselves the types of issues that you're coming up with in your particular department, whether it be legal or HR. So our first question for the chat is, what do you believe are the biggest benefits of using AI in the workplace? Ashley?
Thanks so much, Christine. I'm going to talk a little bit first about how we're seeing some of our clients' internal HR teams use AI in the workplace. And Victoria, you can go to the next slide, please. So obviously, one of the biggest areas that hopefully everyone listening in has heard about using AI or generative AI for in the workplace is with the screening of applications and hiring of candidates for employment. This really is kind of a game changer for a lot of organizations. We're seeing clients obviously use AI to screen applications using key terms to tag skills based on candidates' experience level, as opposed to just kind of looking at where they went to school or what degree they might have, but really trying to drill down into what specific skill set they have. Drafting job requirements. So AI can really help more accurately describe the skills needed for certain roles in the hiring process based on the job descriptions. And we've even seen some of our clients using AI to review what other jobs might be available if an applicant that they really like isn't quite right for a particular role that they applied for. Performance monitoring and predictive analytics. So we're seeing clients start to use AI for performance reviews. And that might freak some folks out, right? When we think about feedback and going through the performance review process, we want to make sure that there's a human element to that. And we're going to talk a little bit more about that today. But we're seeing kind of AI being used to help us start that process. So perhaps just helping to pull information from a lot of different resources to start that performance review process. Also generating a visual model for the feedback given as part of the performance review so that the employee can reference that throughout the next, period of review process. Employee engagement, onboarding, training is another area we're seeing our clients use AI in their workplace. It can really help new employees learn the institutional knowledge of an organization faster. Employee surveys and bots to answer questions about company benefits is another way that we're seeing organizations use AI. Let's go to the next slide. We're seeing, we work a lot with legal departments, and we're seeing, company legal departments embrace AI in a very meaningful way, reviewing and managing contracts. So, for example, we've got a vendor who sent us a new contract. We want to compare it to kind of the form that we are used to using, that we like, we've already vetted. And so providing a very, very quick comparison. Summarizing documents, preparing presentations for boards by pulling from a lot of different reports, for example. Obviously, legal research and litigation support, and then conducting internal investigations. So, for example, AI tools can record the interviews from witnesses, draft up a nice summary of what the witness testified to or provided a statement, and then compiling those summaries into an investigation report. The benefits of using AI, let's go to the next slide. Obviously, increased efficiency and productivity, faster results, expanded automation. There's less manual work in reviewing thousands of resumes, for example. Obviously, cost savings is a huge benefit that our clients are seeing in the use of AI. Predictive maintenance may identify problems before they occur, for example. We're also seeing AI really help generate tailored, personalized content to suit our clients' particular business needs. For example, using customer preferences to tailor that customer service experience. Data-driven insights. So it may help uncover patterns and trends that our traditional processes that we're using will miss. Faster innovation, enhanced creativity. So simulations and design tools can accelerate product design, for example. And then we're seeing improved decision-making in many instances, which can result in more accurate results. So lots of benefits, of course. So one thing that we're really interested in, and Victoria, you can go to the next slide, is what is your department using or thinking of using? That's something that Ryan, Christine, and I love talking to our clients about, or anyone in this space, because we like hearing about, there's a lot of AI products out there right now that organizations can choose from. And we really like learning and hearing about what has been helpful to particular organizations. So please feel free to put that in the chat. So let's move on. Obviously, lots of benefits to using AI, but there's also a lot of risks. And I think just very briefly touching on some of that, the over-reliance on AI. So a critical component of a lot of the generative AI is that those tools want to please us, the users using those tools. And so it's easy to consider it as kind of a foolproof tool and over-rely on that as opposed to our human judgment, our human experience, and adding that to the usage. So it's important to have human oversight over the development and use of any AI that we're using. I talked about creativity. So it can enhance creativity, but on the other hand, the source material that the generative AI is pulling from can be limited at times. So in that regard, it could actually be a detriment in terms of the human creative process. And then obviously, Christine talked a bit about hallucinations. We've heard a lot about this, right? Fake data that is statistically indistinguishable from actual factually correct data. That's what hallucinations are in this area. And why are we getting hallucinations in generative AI? It's because of the way the models were trained. Again, they want to please us. And in a recent example I was just reading about, there was an Air Canada chatbot that promised a customer that he could file a claim under the airline's bereavement policy to receive a discount for an airline ticket because unfortunately his grandmother passed away and he needed to buy kind of a last minute ticket. And a tribunal in Canada ruled that Air Canada was on the hook for that discounted ticket, even though the chatbot was completely incorrect about the airline's policy. So just a quick example of a hallucination gone very wrong in that instance. Moving on and honing in on data security and privacy concerns a little bit, I found this study online of the number, or I guess broken down by age group, of employees who share their kind of work information using AI tools, but don't necessarily have their employer's permission to do so. And as you can see, kind of the younger generations who are likely being employed in higher numbers more and more as we see kind of the older generations retiring, right? They're using AI tools and not bothering to wait around for permission from their employers. And that, we can move on to the next slide. That kind of leads into a critical concern our clients have and businesses have is our employees are using these tools and potentially sharing confidential or proprietary information with the AI tool, and therefore potentially jeopardizing the confidential nature of that information and maybe even violating data privacy and protection laws, which I know Ryan's going to talk a little bit more about. So for example, I'm an employee, I'm working, I might accidentally upload and share personal information of my customers using some sort of generative AI tool and therefore violating HIPAA, for example. That's a huge concern that our clients have and something that we want to be really cognizant of. Also, one thing to be really careful about is AI tools, and again, it's really important to pay attention to the user service agreements for any type of AI tool that we as a business are using, because they could be taking data that we put into the tool and training their model on that. And that potentially is an issue if we're trying to keep certain data that belongs to us or our customers confidential. So just a couple of data security and privacy concerns that are very real that need to be acknowledged. Moving on to another big concern with the use of AI, obviously there's some ethical concerns. And one thing that I think will be really interesting in the workplace context is how AI might be displacing manual labor and what obligations might an employer have to their workforce when that occurs. The EEOC released some interesting guidance on that recently that talks about how they view an employer's responsibility to help train humans to scale up their skill set if there is a risk of AI replacing their jobs. And I think that's going to be an interesting area for all of us to watch. But Christine touched on kind of a huge concern we have as employment attorneys and guiding businesses on using AI in the workplace, and that's inherent bias that could be present in generative AI. So for example, here's 3 studies that found large language models can exhibit certain types of discriminatory bias. For example, this UNESCO study found that large language models exhibit gender bias, such as describing women working in domestic roles and assigning more diverse, high-status jobs to men. This Nature study I thought was really interesting because it determined that certain large language models exhibit covert racial discrimination through dialect preferences. And then finally, this Brookings Institute study is finding that a specific type of AI-based financial services tool can perpetuate socioeconomic inequalities because they're based on credit scoring that has some inherent biases within that. So again, if you think about kind of this bias issue that we have with AI, it really is rooted in kind of the data that the AI model is trained on. We have inherent biases in facts with respect to our country. For example, women didn't get the right to vote in this country, in the US, until 1920. And you've got generative AI pulling from kind of our history, factual history. And so, of course, there's going to potentially be a skewed answer at times about women's place in the workforce, for example. So just some things to think of in terms of bias. The EEOC, moving on, has issued some guidance on AI usage. Just last year, 2 years ago, May of 2023, it issued some guidance on hiring, transfer, demotion, monitoring performance, determining pay or performance, and other employment selection procedures using AI, and asking employers to focus on the potential disparate impact that the use of AI could have on making employment decisions. So again, this is something that employers are on the hook for under our anti-discrimination laws in this country. Employers could have a facially neutral policy or procedure that has an adverse impact on a protected group. And the EEOC is very concerned that certain AI tools exhibiting biases could have that adverse impact. So these are some of the prompts the EEOC is encouraging employers to look into when they're implementing AI tools. And then very briefly, I wanted to touch on some of the legal risks. So some of the lawsuits we're starting to see involving the usage of AI in the workplace. There hasn't been a ton of litigation yet, but we really do anticipate this increasing significantly. The EEOC sued a company, it's actually 3 companies combined, called iTutor Group. This is a, I believe, Chinese company that hired English speakers in America to provide kind of remote tutoring services to students located in China. And the EEOC alleged in that lawsuit that the programmed tutor application software automatically rejected female applicants. So these are folks that they're trying to hire to be the tutors, that they automatically rejected female applicants who are 55 or older, or male applicants who are 60 or older. They did settle that lawsuit for $365,000 with injunctive relief. If you don't know what injunctive relief is, that's basically the EEOC comes in and says, if you want to settle with us, we require your company to make a whole bunch of policy changes. Could be training, could be additional monitoring. There's one other case that's actually still pending in the federal court of the Northern District of California. This one is one that we're all looking at. It's a very interesting case. This individual, Mr. Mobley, alleges that Workday, their AI applicant screening tool, improperly screened out him as an applicant to work for other companies on the basis of race, age, and disability. The court actually dismissed the allegations of race and disability, but right now the allegations of age discrimination are still currently ongoing. And the court just recently granted preliminary certification under the Age Discrimination Employment Act to allow this lawsuit to move forward as a nationwide class action. So for employers, this is very concerning. We're watching this carefully to see where this is going. And interestingly, this last point I wanted to make, the court rejected an argument by Workday that it's not an employment agency or employer. Because if you think about it, Workday's position argued, well, wait a minute, we weren't trying to hire Mr. Mobley. All we were trying to do is provide other companies with the software so that they could look at applications and then potentially hire candidates for positions. And the court actually rejected that argument. So lots of risks to be thinking about. And with that in mind, I want to turn it over to Ryan.
Perfect. All right, thank you very much. So from here, we're going to dive into the regulatory landscape of everything and just kind of set the stage for, what things look like. And, predictably, when we start to look at the map here, it is very wide open right now. This is kind of new territory for a lot of jurisdictions, a lot of legislatures and policymakers, even if the technology has been around for a little bit. And so there's a lot that's still in flux. And so, as you start to dive in and as we'll go through, if you click on the map here, you'll get to see that, we'll talk through some of the AI specific regulation that's currently in place in the US states. There's also, some action happening at the federal level, although not in the way that some people would have hoped for. There's also very specific regulations, such as the New York City Local Law 144, and some of the interplay that happens with existing data privacy regulation. Of course, the EU has its Artificial Intelligence Act, and around the world globally, a number of countries are developing frameworks and cooperative agreements among other nations to kind of tackle AI on a global scale. So there's a lot that's happening here, but we're going to kind of dive into it piece by piece, starting with the overview of the US. So right now, this is a map of what AI legislation sort of looks like at the moment. As you can see, there's a handful of states that have enacted AI laws, and it's not surprising that these 3 states right here are the ones that have passed some general and more comprehensive types of AI regulation. These 3 states tend to be the first movers in any sort of regulation involving data. They were some of the first states to pass data privacy laws, so no surprise that they're the same ones that passed AI laws as well. But as you can see, a number of states are still working through active AI legislation. And they may or may not pass things. It may be broad or narrow. It remains to be seen. But we're also seeing a number of states that are failing to pass legislation as well. And Virginia is an interesting case that we'll cover in a little bit. Part of the challenge with developing AI regulation is because AI as a term is very, very broad. As we've already kind of talked about, it covers a number of different types of tools and systems and scenarios. And so trying to legislate for that, especially comprehensively, is a bit of a challenge. And so what we're seeing is a lot of legislation is very distinct in covering specific topics. Of course, we have, today's topic, which is the use of AI for employment, such as hiring. But we also see things, traditional, such as consumer protections. Other legislation is focused on trying to give each state a competitive edge when it comes to AI by setting up basic education and training for students and workforces so that they can attract talent to the state and therefore business. And then we also have legislation related to, specific regulated sectors, think health and insurance. And of course, with the rise of some of these tools, especially these, new video generation tools, I think we're going to see a lot of legislation centering around deceptive media, particularly when it comes to things such as deep fake and impersonating other individuals, and also from a national security perspective, elections as well. Finally, some of the legislation is actually mandating that states actually stand up AI task forces and do research and studies into AI, kind of trying to understand what the landscape looks like, what both from a regulatory perspective and a technology perspective, in order to inform their policy approach. So there's a lot happening here across the states, and will continue to happen. Moving on, speaking to some of the specific state level legislation, I wanted to kind of cover those ones that have already passed things, just to get a sense of what it looks like. So California, as usual, tends to focus more on social media types of organizations. And so their legislation that has passed is focused on, those kinds of areas, particularly when it comes to, watermarks and detection tools. Think about things that are posted on social media, things like that. But they're also, focusing on trying to unpack the black box. So essentially, instead of having these AI algorithms and decision-making processes cloaked in some sort of proprietary or intellectual property type of obfuscation, basically opening things up and making AI developers accountable for disclosing, the training and data set information that's involved. So really focusing a lot on transparency, explainability, and accountability. Looking at Colorado has passed probably the most omnibus type of AI specific law to date. It's a lot more extensive than other states have managed to pass so far. But it was a challenge to get it across the finish line, and that will be relevant in a moment. But effectively, Colorado is focused on regulating high risk AI systems that make consequential decisions. Now, what does that mean? Well, the high risk is, directly related to the consequential decision making, and those decisions are ones that have material effects on things related to employment or employment opportunities, finance and lending, healthcare services, housing, insurance, or legal services. Things that really impact individuals very deeply, with far-reaching effects in their personal lives. And because of that, there's a number of requirements throughout the Colorado legislation, but some of the key ones to focus on, particularly because they're relevant to our discussion later on that we'll get into, is about like putting this into practice. And some of the key requirements are about disclosures, notices, and conducting AI risk assessments. One of the neat quirks about Colorado is that they have, very specific risk assessment requirements for both, developers and deployers of AI systems. And so that's something to be aware of, if you're going to adopt and implement something, even if you haven't developed it in-house. Moving on to Utah. Utah is also very interesting and has been extremely active in AI regulation, albeit passing, a number of smaller bills and amendments. Similar to Colorado, they have, requirements related to high-risk AI interactions. And again, think about things like collecting sensitive personal information, health, financial, biometric data, and that as part of that, you need to really conduct these deep risk assessments as part of that. And then also, there's a lot of notice requirements that Utah is putting out there as well. So for instance, SB 226, which recently came out, actually creates a statutory safe harbor for disclosure of AI. And some of the legislation that's been passed by Utah already has very specific disclosure requirements. One is, say in a customer service type of role, somebody is calling in and they might be speaking with a system and they are unsure if it's human or AI. Utah requires that there must be an option within that system where if a user or consumer asks if it's an AI that they're interacting with, that they must immediately disclose that whether they're interacting with an AI tool. And then when working in high risk or highly regulated information, you had to disclose the use of AI prior to that interaction. So Utah is being really active in a number of ways, just not comprehensively. And that's probably going to be a trend going forward, as we'll discuss a little bit. And finally, I did want to mention Virginia. So Virginia is the fourth of the states that tends to be among those first movers when it comes to innovative, technology related law. And Virginia was actually on track to pass something very similar to Colorado up until um, um, I believe it was May of this year. And it was very much an omnibus type of law. It covered a lot of things. It passed both the House and the Senate, and ultimately ended up being vetoed by the governor. And it's not really a surprise, because a lot of the reasons that Virginia failed to pass were the hurdles that Colorado just barely managed to clear. And the relevant quote, for why this probably didn't make it is Governor Youngkin in the veto message basically said, there are many laws currently in place that protect consumers and place responsibilities on companies relating to discriminatory practices, privacy, data use, libel, and more. So essentially saying we don't need more regulation. We already have things we can amend from there rather than introduce something new and comprehensive. I think we might see some more of that in other states where they look to their existing law and where they can add AI in rather than having specific or distinct AI legislation. All right. So, some other things, relevant to our conversation, especially from an employment context, is, New York City's local law 141. This came out, a number of years ago, but it's still relevant and worth mentioning because it prohibits employers and employment agencies from using an automated employment decision tool unless it's been subject to a bias audit within 1 year of the use of the tool. And additionally, information about that audit has to be made publicly available. So essentially going through a risk assessment process and providing transparency, in addition to providing notices to employees or job candidates as well. So some of those fundamental aspects kind of be baked in. I will note, because sometimes there is some confusion, this is specific to New York City, not New York State. So it is kind of limited as well. Maryland also has some employment-related legislation in place right now as well. HB 1202 prohibits employers from using facial recognition during pre-employment job interviews without the applicant's consent. I think that's a pretty common use case that we're seeing, both in terms of use of AI as well as regulation of AI. And then, Illinois also has recently passed something in late 2024, amending the Illinois Human Rights Act that's going to take effect January 1st of next year, so 2026, where employers have to notify applicants and candidates when AI is being used in hiring, promotion, or employment contexts, making sure that the AI systems can't discriminate based on protected characteristics. And that includes even things like zip codes, where you could make inferences based on things that Ashley mentioned, like socioeconomic factors as well. And it applies to any business with one or more employees in Illinois for 20 plus weeks in a calendar year. So, some of the ones to be on the lookout for, and, you might see similar things in other states popping up as well. And then when it comes to state level AI legislation, it's worth calling back to Governor Youngkin about, AI is going to probably have a lot of interplay with data privacy law. A lot of the issues and the considerations overlap. And so, it's going to be trying to figure out how they work together. One example here is related to the California Privacy Protection Agency, which is tasked with enforcing the California Privacy Rights Act, CPRA, which amended CPPA. And I apologize. That alphabet soup of C, P, and A's all over the place really is a tongue twister from time to time. But they're currently still going through their rulemaking process on automated decision-making technologies, cybersecurity audits, and risk assessment regulations. And these were supposed to be implemented actually quite a while ago, and it's been a very slow process. And now AI is kind of overtaking some of these events, and they're starting to have to look at AI as part of this rulemaking process. And when you think about, what this might involve is, automated decision-making technology might use something as simple as a spreadsheet to track personal information from managers, but then using that to kind of conduct an analysis of characteristics to determine which ones it's going to promote. And that would fall under automated decision-making technology covered by these regulations. And if you are using ADMT, then you have to conduct a risk assessment. Again, that's something you're going to hear a lot as we're talking about implementation considerations. And the proposed regulations have included language of conducting very specific assessments for identifying discrimination based on protected classes that would violate various federal or state anti-discrimination laws. One other interesting thing to call out, and this is part of Utah being quite unique, is this idea of AI regulatory sandboxes. Now, sandboxes aren't new. These were inspired by models to test financial regulations, around 2015 or so. And there's a growing use of them worldwide in the AI space. Utah is kind of the first to take this like sandbox approach and creating an Office of AI Policy to create an artificial intelligence learning laboratory program, which is called the AI Lab. Now, the AI Lab is really interesting because it's going to be used for consulting with businesses and other stakeholders about AI regulatory proposals and provide a mechanism for companies to apply for 12 months of regulatory mitigation with a potential extension while they develop AI systems. And that mitigation can include reduced fines for violations and cure periods before fines are assessed. So essentially, kind of the ability to test AI systems and models and implementation without facing the very strict penalties. And I think this is something that a lot of states are probably going to want to look at. And if it's successful, they'll likely, follow. The reason I mention this and the reason I call it out is because it brings up a favorite anecdote of mine about red flag laws for vehicles in the 1800s. And so this sounds like a little bit of a tangent, and I'll admit that it is, but I still think it's interesting for the topic of AI. So when horseless carriages were introduced, people were very, very nervous about it, about them scaring livestock and the dangers and everything. And so there was regulation passed in Victorian Britain that essentially mandated that if you were driving a horseless carriage, you had to hire somebody to walk at least a quarter mile ahead with a red flag to warn people that the horseless carriage was coming. And then, very quickly that ended up being appealed as the technology advanced, new forms of combustion engines, and then the practicality of it all. The reason it's a relevant anecdote is I think AI and data privacy and a lot of these recent tech-driven types of regulations have sort of faced a similar kind of scenario. It's new, it's scary, people don't know what to do, and so they react. And some of the regulations, may seem silly or onerous and everything like that. But I think as people are getting more familiar with the technology and understanding the issues and the principles, that we can do away with some of the red flag laws and start looking at things like sandboxes, which allow a little bit of innovation and creativity and development within safe bounds. So having indulged that, I just wanted to compare a little bit about the AI and data privacy. Now, again, we're starting off kind of slow, those first mover states. And as you see, current state of AI looks very similar to what we saw in 2022 with these data privacy regulations. And it's likely that we're going to see more and more states start to pass more and more regulations over the years as people kind of start to understand the issues and as they start to form sort of a consensus around what they want to regulate, specific topics, specific risks, et cetera. And so I think, if we look again, 2024, the number of states that have passed data privacy regulations and even more coming down the pike, I think we'll see a similar progression across AI landscape in the next 3 to 5 years. All right, moving ahead. So, for employee privacy protections, there's adapting AI to new considerations. When it comes to data privacy, these are some of the things that employees and employers have to look at. But in blue are the ones that are really being influenced by AI. And we'll just quickly go through some of these. We've got workplace surveillance. We've talked about monitoring activity and productivity. And, I know we'll talk a little bit about this in terms of implementation as well. So making sure that, tools aren't, discriminating for reasonable accommodations. For instance, an employee has an accommodation, but the tool flags them as taking atypical breaks and then flags that for disciplinary purposes or for, time of promotion or everything like that. We've already talked about, use of automated screening tools when it comes to hiring and looking at candidates, making sure there's no discrimination there. And then, of course, for employment records, reviewing files for performance evaluation and how that can be used as well. Um, I just want to kind of quickly call some of these out. We already covered a little bit about using AI to screen resumes for, experience that are appropriate to the role. So I don't want to belate this one. In employee monitoring, there has been some developments here where in Delaware, if there's electronic monitoring beforehand, you have to notify employees. This is pretty common practice. I think, you log on to your computer and you get your warning screen that says everything you do is going to be monitored. Be aware of this. And, I think that's pretty well established at this point. But to make sure that there's a one-time notice or acknowledgement involved here. But this also does extend to things like conversations, email, and internet access. Similar, Connecticut law also requires certain notices for electronic monitoring, but it does also prohibit, certain things like surveillance in areas designated for health or personal comfort. So, no cameras listening to conversations in the break room and things like that. And then finally, on the social media front, where we start to see AI and data privacy enmeshing, there is already prohibitions on employers from requesting usernames, passwords, or anything else they could use to access personal social media accounts. Most states have this in place. But with AI, there's an ability to unilaterally screen and analyze accounts without permission. In a non-employment context, there's actually been a number of cases where insurance companies have actually gone out and monitored social media to either make insurance decisions about people or to use it for investigations. For instance, somebody said they broke their leg, they monitored social media and found, a picture that showed them going for a run or something like that. And so this is an area to be cautious of about unintentionally veering into some of these territories because AI is so powerful that it enables that ability. All right, quickly moving on here. So U.S. federal AI regulation. The new administration obviously has a significant fundamental theological shift compared to the previous administration, including their recent executive order. And the focus in the executive order is to remove barriers to AI and effectively deregulation, promote AI innovation, prioritize the policies that remove obstacles. Even though both executive orders do mention things like bias, disinformation, and national security, there's also a couple of shifts. So, for instance, bias under the current administration is one focused more on ideology, what is termed engineered social agendas. Disinformation, pretty self-explanatory, and on a national security basis, where the Biden executive order mandated interagency cooperation, the Trump executive order minimizes federal involvement in AI, assuming a shift to the private sector to develop and self-regulate themselves. So what this means is that there might not be as much cooperation at a federal level, both among agencies and with the states in terms of AI policy development and management. And that, also goes to international as well. And if we can go back really quickly, I did want to cover one thing that has gotten a lot of press lately is, Congress hasn't done a lot of action with AI. That's not really surprising for anyone who follows data privacy. But there is a major development in the current budget bill, the One Big Beautiful Bill Act, which is a moratorium. So the House introduced in its markups a provision to preempt all states from enforcing AI for 10 years. That actually was passed and is now under consideration with the Senate. But it's unlikely. There's a number of reasons why that might face a number of challenges, in addition to a bit of pushback from various people in the Republican ranks. Also, the Byrd rule might make that a little bit difficult for it to get passed. And then, of course, if it does end up being passed, it'll immediately face 10th Amendment challenges. But it's worth noting because even though Congress is not going to step in and regulate, they definitely are going to, try and have a say in AI issues, even if that means wielding their preemption power. Being mindful of time, I just want to quickly go through some of the federal AI regulations. So again, these slides are available afterwards, but these are, three of the big areas where, the three big agencies where AI is definitely going to have, effects, especially for employers. The EEOC, we've already covered. The FTC is, of course, going to be looking at, misuse and fraud, and whether they've mitigated risk. Although that's focused on developers, there's still some consideration about using AI tools, and so making sure that employees are trained so that they understand that they're not creating frauds by the use of these tools. A relevant example in the legal industry is hallucinations, making up cases in court filings. We see that probably every other day at this point, and that's going to apply in a lot of other contexts as well. And then the CFPB, especially when it comes to credit lending, there's anti-discrimination law. The former director really reinforced that. But there's going to be likely to be a continued focus on this type of explainability and not really being able to hide behind the black box in a lot of ways. Lastly, I do want to quickly touch on international to the extent that it does apply to some of the folks on this webcast or to others who might be, reviewing it later on. The EU AI Act classifies AI use in employment as high risk. And so that does require a number of steps be taken in terms of risk assessments and things like that. This was actually one of the first parts of the act when it was rolled out, and is continuing to be rolled out in phases from 2025 to 2027. Internationally, a lot of countries are not exactly creating new legislation, but they're more forming frameworks, and they're also creating these cooperative groups and coalitions to align on safe development and use of AI. So as we look into implementation, as we transition this over to Christine, what we're going to watch for is going to be the primary use cases remain in focus and some of the key practices to have in place. And with that, I'll turn it over.
All right, thank you, Ryan. So we organized this presentation specifically so that everyone would get familiar with the benefits and risks of implementing AI, the legal and regulatory landscape that exists. So now that we can talk about how does my company get started with AI to the extent it hasn't already. So we sort of lay out a multi-step process here. First, creating a governance committee. Second, drafting an AI policy. Third, identifying use cases. Fourth, creating a risk assessment process. And fifth, training your employees. So first, let's talk about the creation of a governance committee. Oh, no, just kidding. One back. I forgot this fun little statistic. If we can go one slide back. As it turns out, your employees are probably already using AI. So whether or not you have all of this protection in place, according at least to this one study, nearly 1 in 3 workers are using AI and keeping it a secret. So even if you are not considering in anywhere in the future or the near future getting an AI tool or two to help with your internal processes, your workers are probably using at least ChatGPT and other free apps to perform their services. Okay, so let's talk about the creation of a governance committee. Now, we have one at Constangy in which Ryan, Ashley, and I are involved. But basically what you want to do is you want to create a centralized AI governance. So you want to involve probably people in the legal department, in the HR department, in the finance department because we got to get approvals for costs associated with AI tools, perhaps someone in the tech department who can explain how the tools are being used, and create that central governance committee. And that committee will be responsible for ensuring that AI remains in all of the legal bounds, the ethical bounds, within the bounds of the organization's values, and to make sure that everything is set in place so that AI can be used accurately and successfully. The second step here is drafting an AI policy. If you don't have an AI policy currently in your handbook, we definitely recommend that you put one in soon. Again, even if you're not planning to adopt any kind of AI tools in the near future, because your employees are probably already using them. So what are the parts of the AI policy that you want to have? You want to identify what is acceptable, where your employees can use AI and where they can't. You also want to talk about data privacy and security protections, so how employees are able to use the data that they have for their work and where they can't use it. So in a healthcare scenario, obviously HIPAA is going to play a part into this area of the policy. They want to make sure not to use any HIPAA protected information. Again, just sort of examining and remembering what we learned from Ashley and Ryan. We want to take into account the ethical and legal considerations that exist and make sure that that is set out in the policy. You want to tell your employees that AI is a tool just like any other tool, and that it is very, very important that they continue to monitor the work product that gets generated from the AI tool. So AI is not replacing the worker, it's just helping the worker do a better job. And finally, enforcement. With every policy that you have, you want to make sure you say that any violations of the policy will lead to discipline up to and including termination, so that you are moving forward in a protected manner. All right, so the next part of this is identifying use cases. So you have your governance committee, you are trying to figure out where in your organization can AI help you. So what problems are you trying to solve? Where do you think you can get the best cost savings? And then you start looking at the tools. There are many. And so that takes some time and some effort. Then you're looking at the vendors and what they cost, because perhaps the AI tool that you really like costs way too much for what you're willing to spend at this point. And maybe you're going to look at the actual contracts of the vendors to see what kind of data privacy they promise. And in addition, if there's any kind of indemnification clause in the contracts. So you have your governance committee, you're looking at use cases, you already have an AI policy in place. And then the next step is to create a risk assessment process. All right. So again, Ashley went over a lot of the risks associated with adopting AI, but you want to make sure that you consider those risks with any tool that you are examining and thinking about deploying. So pre-deployment, you want to go through the risk assessment. You want to check to make sure the tool has no bias and there are privacy, again, security protections in place. You want to use a small group, potentially part of the governance committee, to pilot test the tool. So you give them, say 30 days to try it out, see how it works. You compare and contrast to what a person without the AI tool would come up with in terms of work product, compare it to what the AI tool came up with. For example, there are workplace investigation tools that exist. So maybe you want to do an investigation with the AI tool and the same investigation without the AI tool, and compare and contrast what you learned and what your results were for each. After deployment, you want to continue to assess the tool to make sure it is functioning correctly. And you just want to continue to monitor. You want to continue to assess the risks. You want to continue to look at the different laws and regulations that are being passed in the various states in which you have employees. So again, it's really important that you have a governance committee that will continue to stay on top of of this work, because it is work. I think, what we've learned about the benefits of AI, it's certainly worth it. I think companies will need to adopt AI in order to stay competitive in the various markets that they're in, and to stay on top of things. And finally, you want to train your employees. So not only does this mean that you have to train them on the itself, because they need to learn exactly what they can and cannot do with respect to it. You also want them to train on the tool itself. You don't want people to have the tool and then not understand how best to use it. So, whether that means someone from the governance committee taking people in groups and training them on the tool, or something broader than that, you want to make sure everyone knows exactly how to use it, so you're getting your money's worth with that tool. And finally, emphasize that the tool is just an aid. It is not a replacement for them. That, obviously goes to morale, but also because you want to protect the company and not rely solely on AI to do the work, but make sure that the humans are ultimately responsible for the work instead. The chat is your organization using other practices or processes implementing AI. And to you, Ryan.
All right, I'll keep this brief, just being cognizant of time. So, taking everything we've discussed and trying to look ahead, what should we expect? Well, the obvious is that AI continues to evolve, and organizations need to keep up. Obviously, everyone thinks of AI in terms of being a competitive differentiator in like a business sense, but you really need to understand potential compliance and legal risks. Right now, the hot term is agentic AI, but agentic AI basically means as little human intervention as possible. And so that's going to create a whole bunch of risks in terms of, monitoring and oversight and accountability for the use of these tools. So something to be on the lookout coming ahead. We already covered the regulatory landscape in depth, but it's just going to become more complex. More regulation is coming, but it'll definitely be more of a mix. There's just too many issues under that umbrella term of AI. There's too much interplay with existing law, and as continues to be a problem, too little consensus across policymakers. So because of this, with a lot of uncertainty and a lot of rapid developments, organizations are going to have to be even more proactive. They're going to need to get ahead of potential governance and compliance risks, and really kind of forecast out and really do a lot of hard work to identify and mitigate, legal and ethical issues. And so being more proactive is going to become a necessity going forward. But ultimately, what it comes down to is, what Christine just covered, those strong fundamentals. A lot of the issues in AI can be avoided by just making sure that you have, those defined processes, that they're consistent, they're accessible to individuals, and that accountability permeates across the entire organization. So I know we've covered a lot today, but if you have anything you want to talk about, the three of us are here for any conversations, and we are frequently posting new analysis and thought pieces on our website. So please keep that bookmarked and look for our updates. And with that, we thank you for attending and hope you had a very informative last hour.
Thanks, everybody.
Thanks, everyone.